When you think about our legacy systems, I think they served us well, but they kind of reached their end of life.
There's been this realization that cybersecurity for those enterprises is not just an IT issue, it's an enterprise risk management issue and must be treated as such. And that might seem like a small distinction, but I think really important in terms of how organizations are viewing cybersecurity.
One of the challenge points, just looking at what's going on in the larger ecosystem, is the susceptibility of software supply chain attacks. And we've seen these things occur in a number of different areas, typically more focused on financial type crimes, but I think it's only a matter of time before someone gets the bright idea and says, hey, this is a great way into government systems as well.
So my code, and because we're moving to infrastructure as code and everything is code, my entire code is now abstracted. And so that alone is game changing. On top of that, you add the cycle pattern and you add the resilience baked in, self-healing, rolling updates. So if you have a new release of a container, it's just going to spin up the new version and slowly kill the old version with no downtime. So no more manual patching, no more worrying about updating your software.
VHA in particular is partnered with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the National Institutes of Health in a 3D print exchange. And what they've been doing is designing, testing, and then 3D printing PPE, personal protective equipment, nasal swabs, and some devices to support frontline COVID workers.
There's always a way to get to that perfect spot where you're bringing in those industry best practices, you're translating them into the government space to create a great end user experience.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our virtual event, Infrastructure Foundations of the Future. I am Amy Kluber, Managing Editor of Government CIO Media and Research, the leading solutions resource leaders in government to discuss the perspectives and analysis of the issues facing this industry. And today you'll get a look into that. With many of the technologies we cover across our publication, infrastructure is really that home that allows those technologies to function. Foundations of the Future profiles just a few of those efforts. You'll hear from leaders at the Air Force, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Defense Health Agency, CISA, Customs and Border Protection, as well as industry on areas including DefSecops, supply chain, legacy systems, and more, as they provide updates on how government is setting the foundation for IT to thrive well into the future. You can take part in the conversation by asking questions of your own in the comment box below this video. And you can also follow along on Twitter using hashtag #DigitalCIO. Before we kick off our first panel on IT supply chain security, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Visagie, Dell Technologies, and Caresoft. Moderating now is staff writer researcher Kate Macri. So Kate, off to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Because so many federal employees are working from home now, IT supply chain security has really come to the forefront of the cybersecurity discussion. How secure are my software applications, or my laptop, or my webcam? Is it safe to use my personal phone for work calls? Today, we have two cybersecurity experts who are going to answer all of our questions about the IT supply chain. First, we have Daniel Cruz, who is the Deputy Assistant Director for CISA's National Risk Management Center, where he forges and strengthens public-private partnerships to improve IT supply chain and infrastructure security. Previously, he was Senior Advisor to CISA Director Chris Krebs and Chief of Staff to former Representative John Ratcliffe, who chaired the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protections Subcommittee during the 115th Congress from 2017 to 2019. Our second panelist, Dan Carroll, is a cybersecurity practice manager for Dell Technologies, where he develops cybersecurity solutions for Dell's federal customers according to the NIST cybersecurity framework. He previously worked as the head contract negotiator for the Fortune Global 500 and began his career serving in the United States Marines, where he was a lead architectural engineer. Thank you both so much for being here today. To start us off, I want to hear from both of you about software supply chain risk. Federal agencies rely on a lot of off-the-shelf commercial software, and the attack surface of the software supply chain is expanding, especially with so many of these applications relying on open source software. How are federal agencies mitigating the vulnerabilities that come with off-the-shelf commercial software, especially open source software? Daniel, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely, and good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here and look forward to this discussion. I think central to the question that you asked is why all this matters, and the ubiquity of software across a whole host of critical systems and underpinning a range of critical infrastructure sectors. That ubiquity represents both the efficiency and the power of that, but also the risk in terms of the commonality of the attack surface. And so certainly software represents a potentially concentrated source of risk if you don't have the right vulnerability management and acquisition strategies to surround it. I think luckily there are a number of initiatives right now, most of them including both government and industry, that are tackling the issue of the software supply chain head on. At CISA, we are doing work with industry and a lot of the good efforts at NTIA within the Department of Commerce. They've got a software component transparency initiative that shows a lot of promise there. You've seen just in the last year, NIST and the Business Software Alliance ensure that their frameworks on secured software development lifecycle criteria are aligned and complementary. So that's another positive development in this front. And at CISA, we're right now working with the National Lab to build a series of tools that can be deployed across government agencies, but also private sector partners in the critical infrastructure community to do a lot of this software supply chain analysis, a lot of the binary analysis of source code, to make sure that if there are vulnerabilities, you understand where they are and you don't have a digital pandemic, so to speak, where if there is a bad kernel of code, you can track it, understand where it is, and then patch that soon and swiftly. And so all of this reinforces the importance of understanding the size of your attack surface and having a solid vulnerability management plan, being in receipt and sharing different indicators of compromise, cybersecurity indicators of compromise. You can understand the criticality of your systems, procure things that are more trusted, and then patch them quickly as is needed.
Dan, can you talk a little bit about how private industry can assist in these efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is the shift. And what I'd say is it's around community development and accountability, right? If you look back at software industry, say 15, plus years ago, companies really held tight to their source code. They really held tight to how they developed their software. That was very intellectual, and they didn't want to share a lot of that stuff. With the realization that, I have an organization, I have, a number of people that are focused on protecting my software that is dwarfed by the number of people who want to exploit my software. So the only way to overcome that is for community organization, community collaboration with groups like SafeCode. SafeCode's a community organization focused on working with industry, working with government to help develop secure software development practices, working with organizations that, like Daniel mentioned, with NIST. NIST does some outstanding work in the community around cybersecurity and software development standards. And they're actually doing some really great work with collaborative research and development around secure supply chain. And then accountability is key. So it's becoming more than just saying, yeah, I'm doing this. It now we have to back that up with something, and government and even private industry is moving in that direction. When you look at developing elements like the CMMC, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program that the DoD is implementing. They've asked us for years to validate how we protect CUI data. And we've made attestations to that through DFARS, and now they're saying, well, that's great. We're glad you're saying you're doing all these things. Now we want to establish a third-party certifying body so you can actually test and validate what your real maturity model is in those practices. So I think that is probably the key to this, is collaboration and accountability.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what testing and validating would look like in an ideal world?
So testing and validating is interesting, right? So it goes back to the core of what Daniel brought up and what we're going to discuss here, which is the big part of a secure supply chain and secure software is secure development, right? A secure development lifecycle that is well defined, where you have you go through your development and you have checkpoints along the way to validate your code, to validate where it's coming from, to validate that there's no insertion. And then as we're continuing to mature, you're looking at what these emerging security models like zero trust, where you're not just validating software when it's developed, you're validating software when it boots up every time, and you're validating that software as it traverses layers in the service provision model, from boot into the virtualization, into the application, into the customer presentation.
Yeah, Daniel, could you talk about the zero trust approach, especially as it relates to software supply chain?
Absolutely. Zero trust at its core is a concept that says recognizing the ubiquity of hardware, software, and services and the interconnectedness of those systems that control both the critical infrastructure and then protect and store a whole host of sensitive business data, other intellectual property, personally identified information, that the default standard for any level of access or permission for someone wanting to do something on a network, gain access to something, to edit something, to share something, that the default standard for that is going to be no, where permission and access and further ability to do something has to be granted to you upon request and through company protocols. And so that may sound relatively rudimentary, but for so long, the exact opposite was true, where the default standard was everyone sort of had access to everything, and then you had to do this, paring back of starting to compartmentalize who should really have access to what. And so if you're starting from the standard of zero trust, it doesn't mean that the people at your organization, you don't trust their intentions, but it means recognizing how just one bad click or one malicious line of code can set up a cascading set of events. It can have enormous damage, not just to your enterprise, but to other organizations, to national security, economic security, public health and safety, that it's imperative on the front end to bake in every layer of protection possible to ensure that, God forbid, if something bad does happen, it is as localized and easy to recover from as possible. So that's the concept of zero trust, and recognizing that software is the currency, as Dan said, which really powers everything in the connected digital world. You need to have that zero trust environment on the front end to ensure you don't set yourself up for something truly bad or cascading going forward.
Could you kind of dive into the relationship between the software supply chain and hardware supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because it's one of those things that sometimes is hard to fully disaggregate. Where does one stop and where does the other one start? A great case study and use case I'll highlight for everyone here is around 5G. And when we talk about the promise of 5G, not only is it faster download speeds and lower latency and enabling all sorts of exciting new things like autonomous vehicles and telemedicine and smart cities, and you've all heard the spiel before, but at its core, it's looking at a portion of the 5G network, the radio access network, and recognizing that in 5G networks, it's going to be largely defined by software. And so before you would have physical switches and maybe actually different lines and wires in the ground, things like network slicing, a whole host of functionality is now controlled by software, where before it was the physical arrangement. And so what does that mean? It means you have the radio heads within the radio access network, the things that actually beacon the signals and have the communication with the end user device. But they have all sorts of firmware within them, which is software that's embedded in the hardware there. So right there, you're seeing the relationship between the hardware and software, because you have the software which enables the physical connectivity, but you're going to have monthly firmware updates on that. And so, which is just good practice, because whether malicious or not, we frequently find bugs and things that need to be refreshed for the security going forward. So right there, that's a good security practice. But what if those refreshes, those monthly updates, inadvertently actually add more vulnerability into the system accidentally? So you're seeing right now this nexus between the physical function, right? The signal between a radio and a handset, the software that underpins that, the need to have monthly updates to ensure that you don't have vulnerabilities in that, but then recognizing that refresh cycle itself is a potential vector. And so that just adds to the importance of having as much trust and assurance on the front end, because to the point, and it's a great question, it's really hard to differentiate the line between where the software ends and where the hardware starts.
Dan, I'd love to get your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting is Daniel hit on a really key point there, is that when people think about technology, they just tend to think about the piece of technology that's standing in front of them, whether it's your cell phone, your computer, or anything like that, and they're like, well, my computer runs Windows 10 and my phone runs, Android. Not understanding there is layers and layers of software under that, right? To include, like you said, firmware and BIOS and drivers and all these other things. And they come from lots of different sources, right? A system is not made and manufactured just by one company, right? And to include Dell computers, right? We work with Western Digital, we work with Intel, we work with lots of different vendors, which means you have lots of different groups that are involved with developing software that has to come together and get put into a system to be delivered to people. So being able to create trust in all that software and figuring out how you protect against insertion of either unintentional or malicious is key, because we've all read the stories where, hey, a new release of such and such has been done, and it now has bricked these phones, it's bricked these systems, whatever they are. So software development lifecycle, when you think of security, and like Daniel said, it's not just malicious actors, it's also consequences of maybe poor code writing and things like that. So having a clean, secure development lifecycle around how you develop your software is critical. And then on top of that, being able to validate and make sure that the source of that software is accountable. So is that software really coming from where it's saying, or did someone slip me a bad code of BIOS that they actually went and adjusted and have now given to me, right? How do I make sure that the software that is being put into my system is the software that it's supposed to be, right? So having, like he had mentioned earlier, the zero trust elements, having what is called like a root of trust, and how you expand that root of trust through the processes of the boot and into the delivery of the service is critical.
What are some of the ways federal agencies can make sure their applications don't have bad lines of code or something malicious slipped into their software? Dan or Daniel? Both can answer. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll start with that one as the government person here, and then as a government alum, maybe Dan has finer points to tie a bow on that. But of course, have to plug my agency, CISA here, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We on a daily basis push out all sorts of alerts about vulnerabilities that are observed, either being exploited or not exploited yet, with different severity scale rankings that we work with industry and others to understand. It's a great partnership there. A lot of times what we are alerting folks on are things that we observed through some of our intrusion detection systems on the civilian.gov. You've heard about programs like Einstein. Sometimes what we are alerting on are things that come to our attention through partnerships where the information is shared to us from a private sector partner for the betterment of the ecosystem. We're able to package that in alert and then push that out to the federal ecosystem. Recently, you've seen and so we do that on a regular, ongoing basis, almost daily basis. Recently, you have seen several emergency directives that we have issued, which compel federal agencies on a short and condensed timeline to patch particularly critical vulnerabilities. And so in terms of what can government and agencies do, generally having forward-leaning and mature vulnerability management programs is one of those. But at the baseline, you look at when we push out and we do it judiciously, an emergency directive, and we did one recently on a Microsoft Net logon issue, and we've had various ones over the last few years. We're making that emergency directive. We're using that particular lever because there's something critical there. We want to ensure that that gets remediated sooner rather than later. And so, you always appreciate it when the vulnerability management community has really matured over the last few years. It's not just being aware and sharing the vulnerabilities, it's taking action in a world of constrained resources, taking action in a strategic, targeted, and prioritized way. We continue to try to do a better job with our partnerships to do that.
And what I would put on top of that is validation before deployment. I'm always about the basics guy. I haven't done this for a long time. So there isn't anybody who's running a decent cybersecurity framework who gets a system or gets an update and just rolls it out onto their network. They have lab and validation testing that they do before that to do exactly what you're talking about, making sure the code's doing what it's supposed to be doing, scanning it and testing it for anomalies, all of that stuff long before it should be hitting production. And then even after it's hitting production, doing a lot of monitoring, everybody crossing their fingers and watching to make sure, that things are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And most organizations, whether they're government and even in commercial, have what they will call their gold configuration that they rolled out. And those are staged and managed. And as Daniel highlighted, there are critical issues that hit, but you still can't compromise that validation and testing before you put it into the network, because you could introduce bigger problems than you were dealing with the initial vulnerability.
So pivoting a little bit, in recent years, prominent shippers like Maersk have suffered critical cyber attacks and data breaches that left customer data vulnerable. Just last week, CMA CGM suffered a major cyber attack. How can federal agencies and private industry prepare themselves to get ahead of these threats in their supply chains when shippers face cyber attacks that could expose some of their customers' valuable information?
So what I would say is, I cover, when I kicked off, I talked about CMMC, right? And this, like I said, right now applies to, it's a certification a vendor has to achieve to prove their maturity model in their cybersecurity approach. And right now that applies to DoD. I think that you're going to see over the next several years more of the civilian agencies and commercial agencies requiring this level of certification to deal with exactly what you're talking about. Everybody at some capacity in this day and age, whether they like it or not, is an IT company, right? You may do banking, and banking's your primary goal, and you don't want to be an IT company, but you still need to protect all of that customer data. You may ship boxes, but guess what? You're right. You have tons of customer data and credit card data that all has to be protected. And there's no more room for this sloppy mess that sometimes used to occur as it was to a company's approach to cybersecurity. Because when you look at all of these attacks, most of these attacks and these vulnerabilities that are exposed or these leaks, they're not some high end where hacking thing where you have these guys in a room doing. It's really sloppy stuff. It's posting passwords in clear text. It's, like Daniel said, not doing updates to ensure that you've sealed security vulnerability holes that we know are there. Those are where the attacks are occurring. In ensuring you have a effective cybersecurity maturity model and framework in place is critical.
Yeah, and to build off Dan's point there, basics still very much matter. Of course, there's all sorts of work we do around advanced persistent threats and nation state risk. That is very real. Do not want to minimize that for 1 second at all. But underneath that, the basics absolutely still matter. And if you look at the spate of ransomware attacks that we've had across the United States that have had very real impact, schools closing, not able to educate children. You had things out of Europe recently where ransomware actually resulted in the death of a patient at a hospital because those systems were taken offline. So these are real consequences. There's not such a thing as 100% security, but in far too many of these ransomware situations, tragically, decade-old technology and 10-year-old community-endorsed security best practices would often have prevented these. And so sometimes I think we trick ourselves as a community into we need to squint our eyes and hope that in a decade AI will come in and solve this all. And that sort of innovation's great, but don't let innovation be a crutch to not do what you need to do today and now. And so basics still very much matter. The flip side of that coin is that consequence modeling of understanding how things are attached to each other and how things can cascade is very important. And you mentioned Maersk in your question. I think what's interesting about Maersk is that was malware from Russia that infected accounting software in Ukraine that then took down the global IT system of Maersk. But the largest financial damage was actually Merck and FedEx in the US as a result of their dependence on a lot of infrastructure that Maersk operated. And so you start to see some of these bank shots play out where 4, 5, 6 steps later, the ultimate victim that is hit the heaviest is far removed on the front end from the initial attack target. And so basics still matter, but then we also need to understand and model out some of this connectivity to understand how something that happens over here can impact someone over there.
Yeah, Daniel, there seems to be a lot of overlap between cybersecurity, infrastructure protection, and the IT supply chain. Can you dive into how federal agencies should look at these separate pieces and make sense of them as a whole?
Absolutely. From the CISA perspective,
I'm sorry, go ahead. You said it's the same name scenario. Sorry, go ahead.
it's one of those Daniel mornings here, so we're doing our best. So yeah, from the CISA perspective, and then look forward to getting the Dan Dell perspective after this. But from the CISA perspective, cybersecurity, supply chain security, and critical infrastructure protection are really intertwined layers on top of one another. It is almost impossible to look at them as separate disciplines at this point. And I think it's a really good thing that over the last 2 years, you've had this 2.5 years, this proliferation of interest in supply chain risk management. There is no conference or summit like this that does not have a panel or sometimes an entire dedicated track or day around supply chain. That is great. But ultimately, when we're talking about supply chain risk management, we're really just talking about the existing principles of cybersecurity and infrastructure security with a third-party trust and assurance lens on it. It is a layer on top of what we have already done. And so I think it's important not to look at this as some nascent new discipline that is sort of treated in a silo, but recognize this is taking the existing community-endorsed partnership practices we have built up around cyber hygiene, around infrastructure resilience, doing those, but recognizing it's not just enough to protect your network now. You now need to recognize, who am I doing business with in the process of protecting my network? So it's just a new layer on top of that. And it's not surprising that CISA is not the cybersecurity agency. We are the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. It is almost impossible to separate those two, recognizing the role of cybersecurity as a key underpinning factor for the broader critical infrastructure community.
And to add to what Daniel said, the key element that he mentioned there was layers. Layers of security is critical. So we build a system, it gets assembled somewhere, it gets in a truck. How do we ensure that the system, when it gets in the truck, is that all those components are what they're supposed to be? Now that the system's in the truck and it travels somewhere to a new location, how do we make sure it isn't compromised en route? Once it gets to the new location, how do we make sure all the software and validate that the software is doing what it's supposed to be doing again? And there are, I could go on forever about how you do all of that type of stuff, but the key is there are security layers and practices along all of those areas around how do you monitor your personnel, how do you monitor your code, how do you monitor your facilities, how do you ensure that nothing was tampered with, tamper-proof seals, all that kind of stuff. And it all has to be protected with layers. And that way, if any one layer may be compromised, you could pick it up somewhere else down the line and either revalidate or adjust to reinstate your security posture and validity and safety of that system.
Yeah, so building off of what you both were just talking about, it may be easier, it seems like, for a federal agency to focus on vetting and approving tier 1 suppliers in their supply chain. How can federal agencies go about vetting suppliers in their lower tiers, like tier 2, tier 3? How does a federal agency make sure its suppliers are vetted, especially from a cybersecurity standpoint? Daniel, do you want to go first?
Sure, it's a great question. And Dan touched a little bit earlier on CMMC, which is a Department of Defense initiative. So don't want to speak too authoritatively on behalf of their initiative, but they have laid out in there, based on the size and maturity of your organization, sort of how far deep and what the level of rigor and understanding and certification and trust that you need. And so that is an example of initiative going on that already has built out a framework around the protection, the CUI data protection based on NIST 800-172 of how you can begin to think of it. Two other quick points to hit on. One is understanding this concept of criticality. And there's no magical formula for when I need assurance in my 6th degree and when just my 2nd. But every business has certain processes that are more critical than other processes. And there are certain components, the digital building blocks, the hardware, software, and services, that have a higher criticality in terms of the consequence if they are degraded than others. And so you can begin to look at higher criticality processes and what those enable. Those are probably good places to start where this is a super important business process and the thing that enables it is really critical. If it goes down, there's not a lot of redundancy. I probably want a lot of assurance into that vertical, 4, 5, 6 degrees deep. Other things may be a little bit more peripheral and it's not as bad of a day. And so if you have constrained resources, maybe deprioritize those, focus on the more critical areas. And so I think that is a way where you can use that concept of prioritization and criticality to help guide some of your efforts. Additionally, recognizing that for the vendors you're talking about, beyond just the relationship with you, it's in their best interest to ensure that they have supply chain integrity. And so it's not just the highest order, top of the waterfall entity who is the one who has the incentive to ensure that things are secure down to the 6th degree. Every step along that way has some incentive to ensure that who they're doing business with has the trust and assurance that they want. And so as this environment continues to mature, it starts to become a process that sort of takes a life of its own, where you see it trickle down because everyone has incentive to make sure at some point they're doing business with people you trust.
Yeah, and Daniel is spot on with it. It's in Dell's best interest, as an example, to hold its parts suppliers accountable, because at the end of the day, if something gets exposed or there's an issue, no one's going to go, hey, it was this, subcomponent maker. No, they're going to say it was a Dell issue, right? So we want to make sure, and anybody in the industry on the commercial side wants to make sure that they're in the trustworthy computing game, right? So how we hold our vendors accountable, and when I say our vendors, the folks that supply us parts, is that we hold them accountable through requiring them to provide details on their cybersecurity practices, on their secure development lifecycle practices, all of that type of stuff. We give them very specific requirements about what our components need to look like, and then we inspect those, and we do inspections on them and ensure they're doing personnel background checks, all of that kind of stuff. So basically everything that you hold your primary supplier for, your primary supplier should be holding their component suppliers, responsible for, and that just flows down. So
we only have a couple more minutes, and with the rest of the time that we have, I would love to hear from both of you about how you've seen the coronavirus pandemic impact IT supply chain security. Yeah. So Daniel, do you want to start us off there?
Sure, sort of two buckets to that answer. The first is there is a logistical component. There was a big reduction in a lot of global trade and shipping and just the logistics supply chain. Luckily, we saw very few things break there, but there was a lot of stress to the system, particularly a lot of components and input ingredients to the ICT community imported from China and other places. Our task force is working on a report right now that will highlight some of that. The second bucket is on the more digital supply chain elements, the shift to work from home and mass telework. None of us knew exactly how that was going to go on the front end. I think the positive news is, as a whole, as a government and society and industry, we are much more resilient than we expected, right? There are new attack vectors that became particularly appealing for adversaries. VPN is one of those. We put out a lot of alerts on that recently. But luckily, by and large, when you think about the communications resilience of America, there were some localized instances. A lot of those were sort of last mile problems, though, where the organization hadn't actually increased their number of concurrent VPN licenses to account for everyone working from home. So it wasn't really a supply chain issue. It was kind of a configuration issue that was sorted out after a few weeks. So by and large, while there were some localized issues in terms of throughput and resilience, the nation has been remarkably resilient during COVID and in terms of the communications capacity and throughput. And I think that's a good success story.
And what I would say is that compelling events. This is a compelling event in our history, being honest about this. When you look at, and this is going to seem weird, but when you look at like World War II, a lot of technology and a lot of advancement came out of World War II. The entire fact that we fly everywhere now on long range, that all came from long range bombers out of World War II. The big computer age that really kicked off, following the moon flight for NASA when we got to the moon. This is a compelling event for supply chain, right? Because when we're talking about supply chain, we're talking about IT and stuff like that. We're an interconnected global economy now. Everybody was freaking out because they couldn't get toilet paper and paper towels. There is going to be study and refinements on this, because we basically built what would be called a just-in-time supply chain for a lot of things because there is no more back room anymore. So how we adjust that to go, okay, if there is real stress, like Daniel highlighted, that is global, how do we adjust to make sure we're still getting the services and critical things we need? And this tale is just starting.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have this morning. Thank you both so much for participating today. And I'll hand it off to our next panel.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Megha Chokshi, and I'm the Senior Vice President at Government CIO. In our last IT modernization event about 2 weeks ago, we had discussed the critical role of DefSecOps in transforming organizations into large, high-performing units. Because at its core, DefSecOps is about a unique culture that enables a more efficient delivery and management of secure software. So today we have a distinguished panel to discuss strategies that are being aimed at integrating application and infrastructure security specifically seamlessly into Agile and DevOps processes and tools. So joining us today is Todd Simpson, who is VA's Deputy Assistant Secretary for DefSecOps. In this role, Mr. Simpson leads a very large IT workforce that is increasingly focusing on enhancing software dev that is baked in with security and efficient infrastructure performance. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you.
We also have Nick Chalin, who is Air Force's first Chief Software Officer. He is responsible for enabling Air Force's transition to Agile and DevSecOps as the enterprise moves to refresh its capabilities and its best practices. Welcome, Nick. And thank you both for taking the time this morning to talk about DevSecOps and the tremendous impact it has on all modern organizations. So Todd, I'm going to start with you. You have had IT leadership positions at Department of Transportation, FDA, and most recently HHS. How will you lean on those experiences in your new role as the DAS for DevSecOps at VA?
Well, thank you for having me. And so I think that I draw on my previous experiences really in areas of building out the cloud and understanding the challenges that were there to get an established cloud platform, a true cloud brokerage model, if you will, that could be leveraged for a DevSecOps rollout. Without the cloud, I don't think it's a non-starter. And so I recognize the importance of getting that infrastructure in place. And I kind of know the pathway to do that. Some of that work has been done at VA, and in fact, with some of the vendors that I've worked with in the past. So I'm in familiar territory there. I think that my work at HHS around productization was extremely important to me. Coming into the VA, it's already started its transformation before I arrived. It had moved from traditional waterfall development to product line management. Back in 2018, they had introduced the scaled agile framework for agile development. They had started focusing in on human-centered design. They had started building out their cloud infrastructure. There are all kinds of endeavors going on around API management and infrastructure as a code, and really getting a good SaaS model in play. And I've had experience in all of those areas in prior roles. So I'm kind of coming in and drinking out of the fire hose, but it's not unfamiliar to me at the same time. And at the same time that I'm kind of dealing with all the technologies, having been in the federal government now for over a decade, I know the nuances of the ATO process. I know the nuances surrounding many of the governmental processes that someone just walking in off the street would have a lot of trouble with. And I think, I guess it's that experience that allowed me to get the role that I'm in. And I'm using all of that prior experience to try to very quickly develop some roadmaps to get in front of the senior executives at VA so that I can start to work with them more intimately to make sure that I'm in line with the expectations that they have for the VA.
Great. So thank you. That was an awesome background on where VA really needs to head. So we are really looking forward to the next steps in the transformation. Nick, it's been a great year for you. Air Force launched PlatformOne, and there has been tremendous progress on that front too. So from your perspective, how has this program, PlatformOne, helped in rethinking the approach on product delivery?
Yeah, I think, PlatformOne, you can tell it's something special when you look at the logo behind me. Let's see, it's a pretty cool logo. So you can tell clearly we're a little special thing within the government. PlatformOne is the DoD-wide enterprise DefSecops approved team by the DoD CIO. That was really foundational to the success of the department to be able to move at the pace of relevance by centralizing all of the work we're doing on Kubernetes, containers, centralizing the assessment of commercial products, open source products in these containers, providing this back, by the way, to the entire world as an open source stack. The entire work being done by my team on the infrastructure as code, the containers, all the source code is open source back on ReshapingOne, accessible to anybody. So if anyone wants to check it out on software.app.mail, /DSOP/documents, you're going to find all of the publications, all of the designs, all the architecture documents, and the source code. So that's a great way to get started. On top of that, we wanted to bring enterprise managed services with the continuous ATO. So we created this concept of a continuous ATO when we can release software as many times as needed, multiple times a day. We have teams, pushing code 20 to 40 times a day now. And that's pretty amazing to see, for something that used to take 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 months for some ATOs. And the concept around this is not just to fast track and automate the ATO process. We took a little bit of a different approach, and we're working with NIST to make that a special publication in the NIST special publication in the next few months. The goal is to centrally approve the platform and the gates within that platform. And we have change management gates, testing gates, and cyber gates. What comes out of the platform is then accredited, but assuming it's passing the gates, and then it has to run on a platform that's providing the runtime assessment we mandate. We use behavior detection and zero trust, and we mandate both as well.
Wow, so lots of things over here that I believe, Todd, can be implemented, and I believe it is already in discussion within VA as well. I've heard about the continuous ATO process being implemented right now at VA too. So with all of that's being said, within large organizations especially, we know that culture is generally the elephant in the room, right? Especially when it comes to DevSecOps. We all agree that it is generally the most important thing, but it is largely, in many cases, ignored. So maybe towards the very end or the last piece of the transition or transformation. So for both of your organizations, how are you dealing with both the cultural and the organizational changes that you so require for DevSecOps?
Go ahead, Todd.
This is one of those lessons learned earlier in my career that the culture is often eaten by strategy. And your best laid plans are just like sandcastles on a beach, and the waves wash in and just pull them all out. And this is actually a metaphor that I've used when talking with my senior leadership, that I'm not building sandcastles on a beach here. We're building a dock, and we're going to be bringing the ships in and filling them, and it's not going to be washed away. And when I see symptoms of it being something that Todd Simpson's asking for, not that I'm going anywhere, at least on my own anytime soon. It's bigger than Todd Simpson. It's a cultural change that we need to actually carry through to the end. And I'm doing some, I'm slow to do a realignment or a reorganization out of the gate. I've had experience doing that before. Never really ends well. You got to take the time to really get to know the environment. But I am making some small tweaks in the organization that will lend itself to more delivery and more awareness, more visibility into what's going on. And so I'm creating a front office. I'm bringing the two. I manage a development group, and I manage an operations group, and I manage a security group that does execution on behalf of the CISO. And it's about 7,000 FTEs at the end of the day, and a ton of contractors on top of that. And so it's an enormous organization. So you can see that, it's like moving, it's changing the direction of a giant ship, if you will, and it's not going to turn quickly. So some of the things that I've been doing are actually attacking the culture up front. I'm not waiting. So as I mentioned in my first response, VA has already embarked down the path of DefSecops. We have the tools. We have orchestration tools. We have containers. We have a cloud environment. We have lots of SaaS products. We're refining the governance model around those products to make them more sustainable. But I'm looking at cultural acceptance right out of the gate. I've started by trying to acclimate my senior staff with some important literature, Generation P, the Unicorn Project, Project Phoenix. I bought them all books. I've ordered and organized a training session that's basically I bought 40 seats in a DevOps leader certification program where I'm asking all of my senior leaders and some of my peers, including the CIO, to attend. And whether or not he takes the test is on him. He's very busy. But even my peers and some of my neighboring organizations have been invited in to help kind of staple in on this cultural change by learning what DevOps really is. And there's a large portion of the DevOps leader certification is dedicated to that cultural transformation. So very much like following the scaled agile approach, making sure that leadership is trained and then cascading that knowledge down into the depths of the organization. When I bought books for my senior leaders, I told them that these books aren't for your bookshelf. They're to be cascaded down into the rank and file when you're done reading them. And I take opportunities whenever I see a glaring example of something, I pull it back to one of those books. And I talk about things in terms of detractors, for example, from Project Phoenix. And so I try to let people know that it's not just a book that just lays on your desk for a few weeks. Read the book, try to internalize some of the lessons that are in there, and so you can get stronger and smarter. And so kind of reorganizing functionally to get what we want organizationally, identifying a strong leadership team, socializing the right literature, getting the right training. These things I started right up front, and that's before I had an actual roadmap for what we're going to actually do. I've actually had conversations with Nick where I brought him in and had him talk to all of my staff, and he reviewed an 85-page deck, which is beautiful. It goes through all the nuances of what he's been able to do in the Air Force. And after we were done, I took his deck and I sampled heavily from that deck. I plucked 45 pages from that deck. And I'm now building my own deck based on a lot of the good work that he's done. He told me I could do that, by the way. And I'm going to socialize a lot of that because it's packed full of training resources. There's a lot of the background slides talk about, it starts at what is DevSecops, what is DevOps, and a lot of people in the rank and file are still, toiling away, myopically focused on what they do, and maybe they're not real concerned about it. Nick actually gave me a conduit to do some socialization in a really easy way with his easy to ingest deck. And so that's another thing that I'm getting out there, conversations with folks like him, and then resourcing the artifacts that I'm getting through those contacts.
So Nick, your perspective from an Air Force angle?
Yeah, no, I mean, Todd was spot on. You know, I think for me, first of all, we get stronger, better, faster together, right? So happy to share and happy to learn, and it's a two-way street. And Todd has been awesome to enable that. What I think is interesting is some of the good work being done at the DoD is now spreading. We talked about, of course, the VA, but we have dozens of agencies and companies. That was interesting to see financial healthcare organizations working with us and sharing open source code and working together as a joint team on different projects. The culture piece, back to your question, I think the continuous learning is critical, and I love the book sharing idea. We did partner with the Linux Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and O'Reilly, the books, to provide unlimited access to their databases and content to our people, both contractors and civilian and military, to be able to have real-time access to a cloud sandbox with all the content, all the books, virtual, all virtual on the cloud, with a lot of content there, beyond even just DefSecops. Honestly, there's AI, machine learning. I mean, you name it. O'Reilly and Linux Foundations are pretty much touching everything in IT. And so we are bringing this as a resource for continuous learning. I'm kind of realizing that the next way to measure efficiency and success of organizations will be about their ability to continuously train their people. And honestly, the one time sending people off to get some training in 2, 3, 4 weeks, 1 month, whatever you do, is just not the right approach, because it's just moving so fast. It has to be continuous, and it has to be almost self-taught, because there's a it's very tough for the trainers to keep up with that pace and then create their own content. So it has to go directly from the doers on the commercial side and the learners. And so that self-learning mechanism that we put in place is really foundational to the success of the organization.
So in the spirit of continuous learning and in the spirit of the deck that you had shared with Todd, from both your perspective, how much has DefSecOps been a success in each of your organizations? And as you continue forward with it and start weaving in even more security and infrastructure stability in the process and the overall culture, how do you envision this continuing forward?
I'll go first, I guess. So, I think we have massive adoption. We have to train 100,000 people this year, just in 1 year. It's probably the largest organization that I know, with the largest budget and also the most complex, I guess, set of applications, because, when you start touching weapon systems, nuclear systems, space systems, we're putting Kubernetes and containers on jets and bombers and nuclear systems. That's touching airworthiness, nuclear surety. That's touching things that are just way beyond, the cloud piece, which, is I guess the easiest of all this nightmare here. And so, we have a pretty good scale, but at the same time, this is just pockets within the department still. Although we have every large programs involved in PlatformOne or DefSecops or both. We see, engagements across all of the DoD components and force estate. We have every kind of system you can think about. I was just this morning again talking to the Air Force weather group. We have bombers, we have jets. We just announced last week that we were able to fly the U-2 jet with Kubernetes on board and be able to have software updated while flying and things like that. So there's a lot of good, crazy innovation happening. And we have partnerships with the Joint AI Center, Jake, part of the DoD CIO, to bring that machine learning and deep learning and the AI capability as a service. And so I think what's very exciting, and I think that's really the only way to bring this at the scale of an organization like this, is to remove these impediments of getting access to the basics, right? Cloud. So we have PlatformOne with the Cloud Office. We have PlatformOne for the DefSecops team that's also bringing digital engineering as a service with PlatformOne, also bringing modeling and simulation, bringing AI machine learning with Kubeflow as a service, so teams can have access to Jupyter Notebook and all the AI machine learning tools. So now to go and accredit that and deploy at different classification levels. We're bringing Diode to be able to push containers from the low side to the high side. I mean, we're really streamlining and removing the bottlenecks for teams to be successful.
So Todd, from a VA perspective, how would you, assess what progress IT has made in terms of DevSecOps?
Yeah, so I can't touch that where Nick is. He is definitely the leader. I think he's the leader in the federal government. I've not seen his equal. If you haven't seen the nuances surrounding PlatformOne, it's worth a real look. And it's all out there, easily consumable. I would say that we're at a much earlier stage than Nick is. We do have a very robust cloud infrastructure. We're doing containerization. We are doing reuse. We're baking the security in. The CATO, we're not exactly where Nick is in terms of maturity, but that's one of our target points. I think that where our real strength is on the portfolio and on the product line management, and how that actually dovetails into our delivery ecosystem, if you will. And I call it an ecosystem because it's, we're using DevSecOps principles and agile principles across the board, beyond just our DevSecOps toolchain, and proof of how our customers are embracing it, how our engineers are using it, can really be seen in some of the stuff that was done during COVID, and like with the telehealth rollout and some of the really rapid development and deployment of applications, like VA text for the veterans to get text updates about COVID, and we have an application that allows us to pre-screen so we can walk right into our facilities by answering all those questions in advance. And a lot of those tools were brought into play in a matter of days, applying DevSecOps principles. So we have the ability to rapidly deliver. There's an example of an ATO that we got in just 3 weeks when it normally took us 26 weeks to get an ATO. We learned a lot of lessons from that experience, and now we're trying to have that manifest into our operational day-to-day operational practices, so that we now know, well, it doesn't take 26 weeks to get an ATO when everybody really hunkers down and really, bears down on the problem and responds quickly and makes it a priority. And I'll just say one other thing, the whole notion of the human-centered design around managing our product lines, I think that's picking up a little bit more steam. I can't, but again, going back to the beginning, I can't touch the software factory that Nick has been able to produce. What I can say is that we're positioned to do some really great things because we have the tools, we're refining the processes, and the people are really coming along. And we have this great opportunity at VA because unlike a lot of the agencies out there that I've worked at in the past, this is completely centralized at VA. The business is centralized. So we don't have the federations. I'm not working through multiple CIOs to make products available. I don't have to focus so much on marketing as much as I have to focus on delivery. And rapid speed to delivery, meeting the capabilities that the customers are looking for that solve their business problems. That's what it's all about.
Great. So I hear there's a lot of potential going forward, different sets of challenges for Air Force in its much more mature state versus on the VA side where the product management is very, I would say definitely much more mature than where I would place it about maybe a year or year and a half ago. So, as we are wrapping up this panel, from your perspective, where do you see your organizations heading in the next year and the next 2 years?
Should I go first?
Yep.
Go first.
Great. Well, that's a great question, because that's really where I spend a lot of my private time working on the roadmap, and I'm about to take some of these plans to my supervisor to make sure that that he is okay with the direction that we're moving in, which I think he will be. I haven't been working in a silo for the last 12 weeks, so I've been listening very, very closely. And this notion of moving from complexity to commodity, and really, focusing in on where we're at from a legacy architecture standpoint, and how I want to move it across that from complexity to the commodity area of a pure SaaS model with, some low code to SaaS, but really focusing in on that. I've stood up a platform team to really help me with that, and I've identified a key leader to run that platform team. It's one of the small organizational changes that I've made to complement the product line management that's going on. So I think a lot of the ingredients were in the pot when I came here, and I added a little bit more, and we're about to take it out, pour it into a pan, and put it in the oven. And so we're moving forward very rapidly, and everything is going to be detailed out on some very refined roadmaps. And when I get those roadmaps, it's going to help me with that cultural socialization that needs to occur too, because I intend to make them very public and to talk about them every chance that I get, so that I can make sure everybody's on board with what we're trying to do. That meshed up against what we've already done with Agile, what we already know about human-centered design. So the gentleman, Greg Rankin, who runs our ServiceNow group, who just wrote this awesome white paper on human-centered design. And when I got it, I sampled out a bunch of the tables that he had developed around human-centered design and ServiceNow. And I said, this can be applicable to everything that we do. So I've now ingested that into the roadmap, and I'm going to continue to do that. These roadmaps aren't just going to be steady state as we find new stuff, because the industry is always changing. There are other folks like me and Nick out there that are doing great things, and I want to meet those people so that I can continue to enrich my plans and continue to mature and move forward.
Nick, what about you?
Well, I think it's interesting for me that, the VA is really embracing DefSecops, because I guess the VA customers are my customers today, and tomorrow they will be the VA's customers. So we really want to make sure that they get the same quality of service across the DoD and VA. So it's, I guess, a special relationship between the VA and the DoD and the Air Force. In terms of us for the next year, it's all about scale now. We really need to take what is now kind of pockets within the Department of DefSecops goodness and bring it to become the default. And we already are seeing some of that. There's going to be some memo coming out pushing and mandating DefSecops, and with very clear timelines. But what also is interesting is we see big programs like GBSD, which is all nuclear ground work, that is literally embracing DefSecops for the entire program. So it's completely built on that PlatformOne stack, and all of the contractors are going to be using that central source of truth for their development and testing and staging and production. So that's the kind of stuff we want to see, a broader scale. Really, the DefSecops should be the default. And I always say that it's almost borderline criminal for us as the government employees to not use DefSecops in 2020 and putting and often ended up wasting taxpayer money. So we need to step up our game.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. And as always, Todd and Nick, it has been a pleasure so insightful every single time that, we chat with you. There's new things that we learn from you. And so going forward, I'm really looking forward to catching up with you, especially as we continue with our partnership, the public-private sector partnership to transform government IT. And in the same spirit of what you said, Todd, earlier about human-centered design and, ServiceNow, our next panel is actually about customer experience infrastructure. So I'm going to hand it over to Alex Brown, my colleague, and he's going to lead another great panel specifically focused, I believe, on infrastructure and customer experience. Thank you both. Appreciate your
Thanks for having us.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, Megha.
I think we are in a green room. So
my name's Andrew Underhill, not Alex Brown. Unfortunately, he can't be with us today. He called in sick, so we had a Better Call Saul moment today, and I'm sitting in his chair. So we're going to be talking about customer-centered infrastructure modernization today. I'd like to welcome my panel guests, starting with Reggie Cummings. He's the Executive Director of Infrastructure Operations at the Department of Veterans Affairs. In his role, Reggie is responsible for VA's enterprise infrastructure operations and services, including the agency's Tier 3 technical support organization. He also has oversight over several enterprise programs to include the National Data Center Consolidation Program. And during his career, Reggie previously served in the Navy and also worked with industry as the IT leader at Hilton Hotels. Welcome, Reggie. I'd also like to welcome Ed Mays, Executive Director of EDME, OINT Customs and Border Protection. Before joining CBP, he served in the Marine Corps, including an assignment as the Assistant Commander, Acquisition Logistics and Product Support at Marine Corps Systems Command. I'd also like to welcome Drew Yannick, Industry Practice Leader, Public Sector at Visagi. He'll be representing the industry on this panel. Drew served in the Navy as well as an IT leader in the Defense Department. He recently served as Chief of DoD's 4th Estate Network Optimization Program. And I'd also like to welcome by phone, because unfortunately he can't get video from his facility today, Colonel Francesco Dominici, Director of the Solutions Delivery Division at the Defense Health Agency. Colonel Dominici has spent 24 years in the Army. Before this assignment, Colonel Dominici was the Chief Nursing Information Officer for the U.S. Army Medical Department. Welcome to this panel. So I'd like to get started straight away with a group question. Maybe, Reggie, you could start. How are the needs of your clients necessitating different and modernized infrastructure support? And what are some of the modernization efforts that you have underway?
That's a great question to start out with, Andrew. I think that from my perspective, in terms of traditional I&O, we've had to maybe pivot and rethink ourselves in some cases. We have both external and internal customers. Primarily, the internal customers, or partners as I like to think of them, are really our key to driving and making a difference for our true external customers, the veterans, as well as the various administrations within the VA. And so our job really is to ensure that delivery and stability of core infrastructure, to include our cloud services, is on par and exceeding, or at least adding to the overall value chain. One of the things that we've had to really think about is the whole idea and the concept around agile, and adopting that in a very deliberate way. So we've established more of a safe practice even within our infrastructure area, to ensure that we're one, considerate of all of the inner dynamics associated with the various applications and services that are being offered to our administration groups, as well as ensuring that we can meet their rhythm of the business, the application developers, as well as the application owners and product owners, if you will. So infrastructure as a code is a part of our taxonomy, driving towards that effort to ensure that we're doing all the things we can do from an orchestration standpoint and an automation standpoint to self-service and enable our developers and again, other service providers to help themselves and truly have a CI/CD, kind of experience for our development core. And then from a traditional I&O perspective or infrastructure operations perspective, all the things that we need to think about in terms of just shifting again to the left, self-service, ensuring that, even at our hospitals, that the local staff can do certain things such as move a hospital bed or move an ICU unit from one room to another without having to do and put in traditional tickets just to enable a port, if you will. So, being able to provide those kinds of capabilities are how we're trying to show up and make a difference.
So thank you, Reggie. Ed, what's your perspective?
Well, I definitely think, our user needs, our client needs are driving us, right? Mission drives business, and we as the business support want to move at the speed of mission. So faster deployment, ease of access to resources, eliminating or decreasing delays in services, making sure that we have minimal outages, reducing mean time to recover in terms of issues that we do have, and making sure that we have that customer engagement so that we know what our customers need. As Reggie mentioned earlier, I've got both internal and external customers. Internal customers are actually app development teams, and also I have some external customers that want additional resources that allow them to have their own development opportunities as well. Some of the things that we're working on, obviously, we've got we're big into AWS, so we've got something called Case, which is our CVP cloud. We've got Salesforce. We're working ServiceNow, and I heard some really good things on customer-centered design earlier and design thinking. We're doing a whole lot of that. I mean, we implemented O365 in about 6 months to about 70,000 users. We embarked on mainframe as a service, which we'll talk about later, which was huge in terms of what we do for our automated commercial environment and some cost savings there that are allowing us to modernize. We've embarked on self-service. We're definitely big, believers in infrastructure as code, and we're pushing forward in that area. We've got a solid, actually several solid pipelines. We're trying to make sure we kind of keep a control on that, not too many. But, it's all about the pattern, right? It's how you do the business and the consistency and the standardization. So we're definitely focusing on that. We're looking at, data lakes and data hubs in terms of reducing our data sprawl that we have, which actually turns into a better customer experience and reduced time for access and those sorts of things, which are also important to the customer. And being able to actually, I heard value chain mentioned, and we're working on how we tag all of our data, which means we actually can track cost a lot better now. Some of this is nascent, right? It's in its infancy, but some of it's starting to mature because we've been doing this for about 3 years now. So as I heard on the previous panels, some people were talking about adopting Agile, adopting CI/CD pipelines. That was about 3 years ago for us. So we're pretty deep into this at this point. But, so we're at that point now where, we've moved up the technology stack. We're looking at, software as a service applications. As a matter of fact, we produced a workforce tracking tool in terms of helping us with COVID. During when COVID started, to about 60,000 customers, which has been really good for us. So, it's really all about the customer. I think someone asked me earlier today during this meeting, what was I about? What was my passion? And I always say my passion is about supporting the customer, helping people, and driving mission. So, we've got tons of things that are underway. The other thing that's happening for us is, we're looking at data center optimization, right? We've actually moved out of 2 DHS data centers, and we have consolidated into one. And we're actually looking to reduce that footprint and, embrace multi-cloud and hybrid cloud solutions, so we can reduce costs and have quicker delivery to our customers.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ed. And I apologize for the passion question. I always ask that for some reason. Okay, Colonel Dominici, I know you're on phone. You may have to mute. What are your thoughts?
Well, I summarize it very simple, and I talk about this a lot, right? For me, as a receiver of infrastructure, as a provider of infrastructure, right? I kind of, in a way, I'm threading two roles, and in many ways as a user, right? When I was a user and I was a receiver of both ends of the software and all that stuff, as well as the infrastructure environment and how the provision happened. I have a unique perspective. For me, I want to make IT boring again, right? When we're visible, when we are seen, when we're talked about in hallways and all that, that means we're not doing our job in providing the IT support needed from an infrastructure perspective or any other way, right? When our users and our business and the leaders of our business, as well as many others, right, and our partners have a unique and seamless process of utilizing their systems and their architecture and their processes and their workflows and their procedures, and they don't have to call us for anything, and they don't have to talk to us for anything. That's when we're truly doing our job, right? So I call it making IT boring again. I truly want to make it boring. Today, right? I couldn't join by video because of self-imposed restrictions that have no bearing potentially, or are self-imposed issues that we have within our networks, right? Which is a shame, and it makes it visible. It makes people make phone calls and try to figure it out and spend time trying to change it. So in my mind, my goal is simple: is I want to make it boring. I want to be invisible. I don't want anybody talking about me. I don't want anybody to know my name. If I can achieve that, that means that I'm providing a very good customer experience, a very good customer support, and people are able to use their systems. I call it, it's like a telephone, right? You don't think about the telephone as something that needs fixing, right? You just plug it in and you expect it to work. That's where I want to get, and that's where we're striving to get within the Defense Health Agency.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting. It's fair. I was on a panel discussion last week on user-centered design, behavioral science, and behavioral aspects are key to it. And I pointed out a year or so ago, I was on a conversation, and somebody brought Disney in to redesign the whole experience for the users. And IT wasn't even mentioned, but performance and use of IT was key to enabling the change. I just thought that was an awesome approach to the theme park people in. So, Drew, I'm an advocate of what industry can bring to government. I was just wondering what are you seeing in terms of infrastructure trends in modernization, and with the COVID pandemic now, how has that impacted how technologies are being leveraged in this new norm?
Yeah, so Andrew, it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit counterintuitive. It was a kind of a push and pull conversation. I mean, prior to COVID hitting, there was a whole push for a huge amount of automation, hyper automation. Industry 4.0 was out there in industry. Everybody was pushing towards lights out manufacturing, lights out logistics. And then COVID hit. And McKinsey did a study in the spring and basically came back and said, well, 77% of automation companies are reporting strong or very strong disruption to automation projects. So the conventional wisdom was that the automation market was slowing down. However, that was the spring, right? As this is dragged on, we're starting to see kind of the opposite effect actually occur. So certainly in the commercial sector, you start to see examples where industry leaders are actually doing more automation, and their competitors are afraid of being left behind, so they're struggling to keep up, in which case you're seeing more ramping up of automation happening. And then, of course, on the public sector side, more importantly for this conversation, you're seeing all kinds of second and third order effects related to COVID. So probably the glowing examples of Small Business Administration, the Small Business Administration suddenly had to process a bunch of loans for small businesses, a function that they weren't really set up for and didn't have full automation for. And so we're seeing that kind of constituency derive the need for further automation, ease of use, the ability to do it on their mobile phone, et cetera. And so from our perspective, what's happening then is that we're getting demand from the customer base for, hey, I need this no code, low code type capability to create automation quickly, ease the user experience. And oh, by the way, I need it in the cloud because I can't take the time or don't have the money to increase the infrastructure to support all this capacity. And mentioning capacity, I need on-demand capacity to deal with these surges, but I don't want to have to pay for long-term equipment use going out into the out years once the surge is passed. So I need to really pay for what it is that I'm using. So we're seeing this, in the state of Maryland, we're seeing this in the state of Washington, we're seeing this in the federal government, we're seeing it in the government of Spain, Cayman Islands, and weirdly enough, even the Catholic Church has kind of gotten into the act. So it's all kind of interesting, and I'm sure the VA and the Border Patrol folks are seeing similar things. DHA, fortunately, most of their customers are internal, but I'm sure they're getting similar push as well because they're actually having to react to the COVID crisis as well. So a lot more automation, a lot more demand for increased capacity to try to deal with the onslaught of things that are coming through the gate right now. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. So a question for you, Reggie. Your organization is somewhat unique in that it serves both internal and external customers. Does this present a unique set of challenges?
It does in some respect. For us, at least from an infrastructure and modernization perspective, there are things that we do have to consider that have some push and pull, if you will. Generally speaking, it's the breadth of technology is essentially the same, right? It's just a matter of understanding exactly what areas we need to focus on first in terms of prioritization and all that. As Drew just mentioned, one of the things that we recognized early on from a COVID response perspective was that we were dealing with some deprecating legacy technology. We were really working to move away from some of the things that we were using, at least from a remote access perspective. And just as we were, in the throes of downsizing and essentially sunsetting some of those things, COVID hit, and that required us to do a quick pivot. And we didn't have enough time, or there wasn't, the foresight to know that we were going to need to accelerate, some of the newer technologies. So the older technologies that we were using, at least from a remote access perspective, was what we had to work with. And in doing that, there was two components to that. One, how quickly can we scale up our current infrastructure, given that the legacy environment that we have, and what is that potential demand? We have a known quantity in terms of our internal, customer base. We knew exactly how many folks, there are internally, 300 some odd thousand plus. But it's the external requirement that end up hitting us in terms of potentially having to, basically invoke our fourth mission, if you will, which is, potential healthcare provider for even, those external hospitals or commercial hospitals out there that were over capacity. So that was driving a number of things that suggested, our current infrastructure, which was, sized to handle somewhere around, 50,000 users, which again was in limited use up to COVID. Now all of a sudden we have to consider, order of magnitudes beyond that, right? And how quickly can we, based on our pipeline, the supply pipeline out there, how quickly can we really burn or churn out, more hardware and all those other things to accommodate, that demand. The cloud allowed us to pivot, quickly while we did what we could do with our on-premise, infrastructure. We quickly, marshaled out and built out our cloud infrastructure that allowed us to essentially accelerate, our ability to accommodate, that both internal and external customer base in a way and in a manner that, we couldn't have fathomed, 2-3 weeks earlier, right? And so we're able to, kind of meet those demands, which was, ended up being almost 200%, greater than what we were doing before. Again, our capacity was 50,000. We was probably servicing 30,000 at any given time. We quickly pivoted that to, the capability of handling 250,000, regardless of where they were coming from, internal or external customer base, all based on, our provisioning and pivoting to cloud technologies that enabled us to not just leverage those legacy applications or legacy services in the cloud, but also gave the same user experience that our previous internal customers were already used to. So it's all about thinking about what's out there, what's available, and how you can leverage that without putting real guardrails around what it is that you're tending to do. And one of the things that we found in that whole activity was that everyone there was no pride of ownership, right? And so whatever we think can get out there first, we can obviously look at other technologies and all that other stuff at the same time that we're servicing our customers, but no pride in ownership, right? There's a lot of technology that's out there to be used and to be leveraged. So get as much requirements as you can right off the bat, and stay flexible enough and agile enough, to pivot when that one thing doesn't work, right? So we learned quite a bit about not just our own internal user base, but also some of the demands that our external users had that was unknown or couldn't been fathomed at the time that COVID hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the major things I think VA is invested in that you haven't talked about yet is product line management as a means to extend that outreach to the customer base, right? Your internal customers and external customers. What progress has IO made in implementation of product line management?
Yeah. So from an infrastructure perspective or enterprise services perspective, we use the same taxonomy as our application and traditional product groups use. So that's a good thing. From a framework perspective, obviously we're safe and we operate in that manner. I look at our trains, our agile trains, as running horizontal to the vertical trains that are running for the application groups, and we move forward and are marshaling out with 3 product lines primarily. One is our identity and access management. That's also within our infrastructure and enterprise services space. We have a cyber product line that's formulating, and one that's a bit more mature at this point is our platform services product line. And so what's good about the approach is that there's very little distinction or difference in how we look at product lines from an infrastructure perspective, vice the products and application groups, which gives us the ability to truly integrate and deliver and have those solid PI events that are necessary to ensure that as we change or as we adjust that is considerate of again the vertical trains that are running.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Another group question now. We've seen a major shift towards DevSecops in industry as the preferred methodology for driving application development. How do your respective organizations see your role in terms of driving the DevSecops modernization initiatives forward? Maybe I could start with Colonel Dominici this time.
Yeah, I think we're taking a very unique approach. We're looking at DevSecOps, and the Department of Defense has they're moving forward a very robust structure. Pretty sure a lot of people have heard of PlatformOne as well as other activities. We because I'm in the software space, right? I fully believe DevSecOps, as many people know, it starts with doing an appropriate analysis of your software environment and seeing how are you going to provide a good strategic approach to your containerization processes and procedures, and how are you going to ensure that those environments can meet the requirements of the myriad of activities. I have over 100 systems within my portfolio that I manage, and all of them are very unique, right? From GOTS to COTS and everything in between. And now we're entering into a phase of trying to move away from typical person over a keyboard pounding away code to a more of a low code, no code type of environment, and more of a consumer of as a service type of capabilities, either software or platform or whatever you want to call it. So that's where we are within the defense agency, more specifically within the IT environment. We're trying to pursue those as a service models to ensure that we can transform our offerings to our clients and to our users into capabilities that can meet their requirements, but that we end up not in that massive code development process, right? That's something that we in solutions delivery we do, and we do it very well. We develop code in many different applications and solutions. However, we're moving away from that. Strategically, it doesn't make sense anymore. The technology has caught up to a point where we can start doing a lot more configuration rather than just doing coding. So we're transitioning into that space. I believe that our customers are seeing it as a very appropriate thing to do. It allows us to have a lot of economies when it comes, not just in terms of monetary economy, right? Or cost savings. That's a byproduct of adopting that type of technology, but more into the provision of capabilities in a much rapid, effective way that allows for much robust and easier functional engagement and approval of those processes. So that's where we're heading. That's where we're going. And I believe DevSecOps has a play in that. It's not the full thing. It's not the full spectrum. And for some of our capabilities, it's not even a potential solution, right? At this point, but it's part of the solution, and we're looking at all of those.
Yeah, thank you. Ed, maybe your thoughts. I've got an eye on time. Maybe your thoughts in 2 minutes? 1 minute?
So honestly, I think, wear a couple of hats, right? One is the executive director for enterprise data management and engineering, but I'm also our cloud action officer and the cloud lead for OIT CBP. So DevSecOps or SecDevOps, whatever you'd like to call it, is pretty essential to us. And we work closely with our application development teams and our CTO to ensure that, security is built in. It's really important to us, in terms of looking at our pipelines and having both, our code repositories inspected, static code testing, dynamic code testing, all those sorts of things that really, ultimately drive security and a better customer experience. We've invested in our ISO support, making sure that we can review our common control packages, ATTs and ATOs. And we've also worked on, getting a common control package that looks across different platforms. So whether you're in cloud A, B, or C, that you can actually derive those controls without having to reinvent the wheel every time you move to a new environment. So we've done a lot of work in that area. It's pretty central to what we're doing, and we plan to continue driving forward. This is key in terms of running your CI/CD pipelines, and it's also important as we talk about our customers. Right, our customers have to be involved. Our users have to be involved. Because their feedback will drive where mission takes us.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Reggie?
No, just as Ed mentioned, I mean, it's for us, it's all about ensuring that our overall cloud strategy and our infrastructure orchestration and automation is consistent with ensuring that developer experience such that they can deliver in an agile and scalable way.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you. I have a question for Colonel Dominici specifically. What infrastructure-based challenges does your agency face when decommissioning legacy systems? Now, obviously, it's a question for you, but this is a big question for everybody, really. You'll be answering on their behalf, I think.
Yeah, I think for us, so we are right now in a modernization effort for our electronic health record systems, right? We have a very robust distributed system that has multiple, over 100 hosts around the globe, right? And we are replacing that with a single system hosted in a single environment. Not only that, we're replacing about 12 additional capabilities across my portfolio that will be replaced with this new technology. So I have the biggest challenge that I have. I can tell you that it's not the infrastructure. The biggest challenge is the coordination of capabilities and ensuring that I am not dropping from a contractual perspective or any other way within the contracts capabilities that might be needed, right? So everybody talks about this capability will be replaced by the system, but some of those capabilities have sub-capabilities within them that might or might not exist in the new system. So I have to orchestrate the analysis of those capabilities that those contracts provide and ensure that whatever it is that is not being replaced, that I can either maintain it alive somehow within that contract and or shift those capabilities to a different contract to ensure that we don't have a big delta or a gap in capabilities that are required or even critical. So aligning all those contractual requirements, ensuring that I am decommissioning in a smart way and that I'm not creating gaps of needs within my user community, and then aligning the infrastructure that exists behind that to ensure that we're not affecting other capabilities. So in some of those, many systems or many capabilities could live within an infrastructure enclave. So ensuring that I am carefully extracting those capabilities from those while not affecting anything else, it's a big challenge, right? And we are doing pretty well doing that, but this requires a continued review of the plan. So even though you have a great strategic plan and a great plan, that plan gets revised almost on a daily basis because of new discoveries, new processes, new issues that are uncovered. So I think that coordination is a massive challenge, and it's something that if you don't understand what it is that we're trying to do in detail, and you don't have people capable of understanding all the intricacies and the links that exist between them, it can create it can wreak havoc in any organization. And that's what I was hired to do here, was to transform and transition the environment from what it exists today into the future. At the same time, doing a massive reduction in costs and improving those capabilities. So when you talk about transformation, this is a massive transformation that we're taking within the MHS, and I am very humbled to be leading that transformation.
And congratulations on your efforts today. One of the big challenges with legacy systems is maintaining access to legacy data as you transition to modern systems. What was your approach to migrating data from the legacy systems?
So right now, a key aspect of it is we're still in the transition of the data, but one of the key things that we did was we made a decision not to migrate junk data, right? So we did a surgical extraction of specific in some of these transformations. One of the ways to do it is basically say migrate everything, right? In this case, we have selected to migrate certain areas of our systems first and focus on those and do it right. So we actually have constructed a massive data lake that is collecting all the data across every enterprise system and ensure that data exists. And within that environment, then we're doing appropriate cleaning of the data, appropriate looking at nomenclature, ensuring that everything is there. So that way, as we transition to a new environment, that data that could be dirty data and all that, that's going to contain within the data lake, and then the appropriate data then that is cleaned up and all that is being migrated into the future state. So we didn't do a big bang approach, transition all the data and then start cleaning it out outside of the new system. We're doing it in a methodical way. So, and we continue to do that. We continue to refine the potential future solutions for that. And at some point, the intent is that we have a repository that is clean, that is effective, and can provide the data, that can provide all the data needs for anything, right? Right now, we're depending on it for the COVID vaccine process, and I am leading the effort for the IT component of the COVID vaccine for the DoD. And we are relying a lot in that data that exists there. And we're trying to ensure that we don't break any processes and we can provide the appropriate data requirements and data needs, and we can meet those for CDC and HHS and other entities. So it's a big challenge. I think we are doing pretty well with that challenge. But it comes with a lot of headaches and a lot of sleepless nights. Over.
I'm sure it does. Thank you. So we're going to overrun to about 12:50, if that's okay with everybody. Ed, I have a question for you. Customs and Border Protection, the ACE Automated Commercial Environment Collective Modernization Program that you have, is an apt example of innovative approaches to modernization. Could you talk a little bit about how this was unique? I think even the process for securing funding, I believe, was unique.
Sure. Well, first of all, looking at ACE, ACE is responsible for a large chunk of our nation's economic security through enforcing lawful international trade. In FY19, ACE facilitated the electronic importation and exportation of goods to the tune of, are you ready for this? 2.7 trillion in imports and 1.5 trillion in exports. So between the Cargo Systems Program Directorate and my organization, this is a huge responsibility if you look at those numbers to scale. Previously, the ACE was running on a mainframe environment, COBOL-based, over 30 years old. And one of my tasks when I came on board was, how do we get us off the mainframe? And so we were able to actually get us off the mainframe by moving to something called Mainframe as a Service. It was kind of an idea that our old Assistant Commissioner, Philip Landry, came up with while sitting around a table one night, and we made it happen, which was kind of an interesting thing, right? Just talking about innovation, right? Ingenuity. But with that, we were able to save initially $10 million a year off the old mainframe bill just by shifting to this new construct. What we're looking at now is, how do we shift off completely? Meaning the only thing we've got left on that mainframe is a portion of ACE called collections. How do we shift off that now and move to a more modernized environment? And that's underway. We were able to make a business case, and we were able to get a technology modernization fund dollars for that to the tune of about $15 million. So, it's really amazing what you can do when you sit around and you bring people together and you ideate, right? You look at, what is the art of the possible, and you kind of free yourself of the daily constraints. And I think that's what we saw in terms of innovation. And obviously we've driven down the costs. And once we're completely off the mainframe with respect to collections, we can see ourselves, potentially saving up to $30 million a year. So this was a significant effort. And I'll just say it took us about a year plus to do it. But the key to it all had nothing to do with, bureaucracy. It had to do with agile development. It had to do with wanting to get there and having creative people, human-centered design, design thinking sort of processes, whiteboarding, and just getting, the creativity out of people. And that really drove us to these technical solutions that have saved us lots of dollars.
Yeah, thank you. For the interest in time, I just want to skip a couple of questions. We may have time to come back to it. And I want to ask the question to Drew, that the hybrid digital infrastructure management is an emerging trend. Do you have a perspective on its value and the challenges of implementing it?
Yeah, so if we back up a little bit and talk about what hybrid digital infrastructure means, it's really talking about the fact that you've got multiple, organizations, agencies, et cetera, that have got some of the stuff is on premise, some of the stuff is in the cloud, some of it is in multiple clouds even. In some cases, you have more than one cloud provider. And then in other cases, you even have the integration of OT systems, which makes managing the hybrid environment a serious challenge. So if you think about it from a service management perspective, HDIM really is kind of an emerging trend, primarily because we have to get our arms around this, right? How do we make sure we have visibility? How do we do appropriate configuration controls? How do we manage change management in that environment? If you just think about like the FedRAMP environment and GovCloud in general, anytime you make a change to it, you got to go through the FedRAMP process, and then it has to be coordinated with all the agencies that are also consuming the service. So, but the pluses are, if you can manage this well, and if it's done properly, is that you're going to get more resilience in the infrastructure, right? So the combination of the stuff that's on-prem, the stuff that's in the cloud, creates the resilience and the ability and survivability that you need to support both the clients and constituents that are using the service, but also the federal government at large. You get much better disaster recovery. You get better assurance through data replication. So that's all goodness. And contrary to rumor, right? A lot of people like to say, well, we don't want to do cloud because of security. Well, the reality is, if it's done properly and done well, you actually get a security bump, because now you're able to do patching much easier. You got less infrastructure to manage. More patching that occurs in a broader frame, covering more agencies, right? So if it's done properly, you actually get that uniformity down better and easier, and it's easier to apply the NIST guidelines associated with it. So if you do it right, it can actually increase your security. Of course, if you do it wrong, the exact opposite problem. And then, of course, there's the on-demand capacity. We talked about this several times. The colonel was saying, I don't want to be talked about in the hallways. The VA was talking about the sudden surge. We saw that with the SBA. And so the fact that you move into the cloud now relieves many of the IT managers who are even in this meeting or in this panel from the demands of having to actually build out new infrastructure suddenly when demand suddenly hits, right? So faster scaling. And the good news is you can also scale back after the peak passes, right? Downsides, the downsides of trying to do this is essentially, the lack of organization or strategy around it. Most organizations don't have an automation strategy. Most organizations still struggle with configuration management, even for what they're currently doing. And change management continues to be like 80%, the source of 80% of incidents involved, right? And so we still really haven't quite conquered the configuration management. Now we're going to add this hybrid layer to it, and we're going to try to coordinate across multiple organizations. So that becomes much more challenging, I think, in that environment. And so then you got to deal with the processes and how to get that workflow. And of course, the key there is probably going to be automation. And of course, we've really only begun to scratch the itch with regards to artificial intelligence and how that might play in configuration management and advising risk as we go to try to make changes to the environment. And then lastly, probably one of the bigger concerns that is less technical is there's a workforce restructuring concern, right? As we move towards hybridization, it's actually going to change what the workforce is required to do. As we move towards citizen developers and low code and no code, that's also going to change the environment. So, those folks are going to have to be retooled for the future and restructured. And then, the last bit I would mention is it also creates some interesting governance issues. So in a low code, no code type environment, as that starts to propagate, you start to run across different governance issues than you had before. Those are all conquerable, but it's those are kind of the downsides. But certainly, it's worth doing. You can certainly see the benefits outweigh the cons, but you just got to do the nug work to get there.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's been a great conversation. Obviously, we needed an hour instead of 45 minutes. I want to thank everybody for joining. Ed, pleasure to meet you. Intriguing. Reggie, thank you for attending. Great conversation. And Colonel Dominici, thank you very much. And thank you, Drew. Now I'm passing the mic over to Amy, I believe, to close out.
Hi. Thank you, Andrew, as well as our other moderators. And thank you to all our wonderful panelists who shared so much on the important work they are doing to build, secure, and maintain the IT backbones across government. Thanks again to our sponsors, Visagi, Dell Technologies, and Carasoft for making this event happen. If you missed anything or want to rewatch any of the panels, a recording will be made available by tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. These perspectives are ones we cover at length, even outside of these events. You can find them across our podcasts and digital articles, for example. If you'd like to stay in the know, subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on our updates and latest news by going to governmentciomedia.com/subscribe. Be sure to check out our upcoming events our team has been working hard on. The very next one, The Future of RPA, is coming up November 5th. So we'll see you in about a month. Thank you everyone for watching and have a great, productive day.